Hello, good morning, welcome. I happen to be Samuel Trapp. You happen to be listening to Damn Radio, and this show is called, appropriately, International Flavor. At least I feel it's appropriate. You may not feel it's appropriate, I suppose. And you know what? You don't have to believe anything I say. That is America. That's America. We are in America, and that is your freaking right to not believe anything I say. However, I think that would be a mistake, and I shall convince you of the same. So for 3 days, well, you know what, though? If you'd like to call in today, if you'd like to send an email that I never read, you can do that at live@damnradio.com or samuelt@internationalflavor.com, samuelt@civicoutlaws.com. You have a government overreach issue, you should perhaps send me an email to that email address. Civic Outlaws, we attack government. We go after them. We got some plans. And there's something else, samuelt@modernlawecosystem. You can go there too and send me some stuff, and we do some consulting and some strategizing for you, your business, for things that you want to do if you want to go do that. But if you want to talk to me today about something international, about something exciting, you call me at 573-746-8020. I get the 80, you get the 20, and we will discuss what's going on the planet or in your life that is important to you, and discuss the things that are important to me. I get to get on here and babble about every single day, Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. And you have the choice to listen. And I like it that you do listen. I think it's wonderful. And I hope, I like to think that some of the things I provide are useful to people to go about their day. World's changing. Might come up and bite you in the rear end if you're not paying attention. So better to pay attention. I got to thinking about this overnight. I don't sleep, right? And so I got to thinking about this. And I'm feeling a little bit better. I don't know. Maybe I'm drugged up or what do you call it? Teed up. Teed, get it? Teed up? Isn't that like a play on words? You could talk about that in the golf sense, but I'm not teed up in the golf sense. I am teed up, like people would say he's liquored up. You know, you're teed up because I had some morning tea. And so tea perhaps had a little too much caffeine and got me a little bit wound up as well. We don't know. We God knows what the truth really is, but we all have our own perceptions of the truth, and the truth may be that I was teed up. It might be that I'm always teed up, and the tea just got me going a little further. So I got to thinking about this overnight. Every year for the past 5 years, okay, been married to a wonderful Russian girl, Tatarka. She's from Tatarstan, and her name is Svetlana. And we have traveled. She's a demanding traveler. She likes to travel. She is currently in Egypt, and she's been to 87, I think, is the number of countries for her. She speaks 5 languages. I mean, she's pretty cool, right? And then there's me. Not so cool. I only speak 2 languages. I've only been to 57 countries, and all 50 states, though. I win on that. I think she's only been to 36 states or something like that. But I've been to all 50, and I've been to 57 countries. My goal is 104. I kick the old bucket. So for every year for the last 5 years, I have gone over New Year's to another country. This year, my plan was to go to St. Petersburg and Russia, Mother Russia. I'm going to go to St. Petersburg. There's a legal conference comes up every year. There's an AI conference I wanted to go to. There's some stuff in St. Petersburg that I have been contemplating and hoping to get to. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. It's just I got too much going on. I'm going to go see my son and his family in Wyoming over Christmas and do something a little bit different. I've been remiss in building my familial relationships, and I need to get up to Wyoming. And easier for me to travel than for a family, right? So I'm trying to get up there and take another son and a couple others with me when I do go. But at any rate, this is a total babble and has nothing to do with my show content that I'm going to get to today. But it doesn't look like I'm gonna get it there. But my point is that the world could reach out and bite you anyway. If you have any goals to do any traveling, to do anything and go around the world, you don't want to be the ugly American. There are too many ugly Americans don't know crap about international stuff anyway. All they know is Mexico, and then they go to Mexico and they treat the place like it's sub-Saharan Africa, and that those people are less. That the people of Mexico are less than what we are. They treat them like servants. They treat them like they would the cleaning lady here at the hotel in Osage Beach, Lake Ozark, anywhere on the lake. You go to years ago it was Russians too. I represented that dude, and they had all the Russian girls. Was hired at all the hotels. He had a pretty cool business going on. And anyway, I don't know. I'm completely babbling this morning, but you need to respect other countries. And I think it goes all the way down to the normal citizen going and traveling abroad and thinking that somehow we are looked up to by the rest of the world. Now, in some respects, we are. Our freedom, our ability to be a-holes, if we wish, is our God-given right to be a-holes if we want to be a-holes. Rest of the world doesn't necessarily appreciate it. And you kind of get sometimes little bit what would be a good word? Certainly suspicion. Not suspicion's too much. Maybe trepidation. Maybe we say, "Oh, geez, wonder about this guy. He's an American." You know how many times I've had people say, "Well, you're not the typical American." Maybe because I'm open. Maybe because I like to learn other things. Maybe because I don't have a preconceived notion that America is better as a country. We're different. We're certainly different, and some things are better. And I'm a patriot. I'm a lover. I love what we have. I love the ability to blab, to speak my mind, to throw out stuff that certain people in other countries truly do not have. There are places that other countries do not have. That doesn't make them less. It makes them different. And so that's what I like to think that I bring to the old mix, to the old radio program, is that sort of point of view. And so sometimes I tend to discuss things, but I have very solid thought, very solid beliefs, maybe is a better word, upon who I am, who we are, and what we really stand for as a country. And I don't like it being shoved down my throat by anybody. I don't like being misjudged in other countries because a lot of Americans are a-holes and or don't know how to behave when they go out of the country. And I hate it when our government does the exact same thing on the top levels. These globalists that go around and lecture the world, the Hillary Clintons of the world, the Mitch McConnells, and all of these globalist pricks that wander around and talk about how we need to make the world America. We need to give the world American democracy. I love American democracy, the theory anyway. The practice, not so much, because we aren't getting what we claim to get, right? And we should be getting what we claim to get. And I think we're a lot closer to it under the old Trumpster than we have been under Biden for sure. What in the hell we got there is a bunch of lecturers. Everybody was doing it. And everybody that likes to tell you what to do on a government level likes to control you on a government level. Boy, I tell you what, they were living large then. And they were living large under Obama. And the government is not your friend. What was that on? I can't remember what show it was or who's first said it. I don't remember the quote, but I remember the approximate how it went. What are the scariest words in the English language? And it went like, "I'm with the government and I'm here to help." Oh, yeah, my ass. You're not here to help. You're here to control. And that's the trouble, is we go around the world trying to control everything and everyone. And so for 3 days, I've been telling you, today is already already Thursday. As I get older, time just cruises, goes a hell of a lot faster. And here I am on this Thursday, and I've been promising to get to Mr. Jaishankar and what his discussion over the weekend. He was interviewed. And I watched that interview, and I like listening to guys like him. A lot of it is like me thinking that this guy represents beliefs that we as Americans ultimately have too, that we're so similar. Those of us who believe as I do, those of us who believe as many of us who listen to damn radio do, that by God, you can disagree. And you can disagree respectfully. You can disagree vocally. You can even be a bit of a prick if you wish to disagree. And you can absolutely do that with me, and I won't judge you for it. In fact, I love the sport. It's like jousting without the long pole, sitting on a horse and falling off and hurting your ass. You get to do it and joust with people mentally. I think it's a good thing. And so, heck, today's show ought to be called Jousting 101, Lessons in How to Disagree Somewhat Tactfully, maybe not tactfully, maybe not even artfully. You got some guy up here, just there's no script, at least not for this part. There's no script that I'm following to get here. This is just me, ad-libbing here in the beginning about why I think this is important and why you should listen and why we as Americans need to be a little bit better behaved internationally. And I'm telling you, the changes are coming. The changes are upon us. And I believe that the Trumpsters of the world actually understand that. They may not be as artful as I would like either, but I think they're beginning to acknowledge these changes on the planet that are inevitable, and we need to come to grips with that as Americans. And it shouldn't be as scary as we like to think. The globalists of the world are out there going, geez, we got to stay in charge. We got to stay in charge. Yeah, but the question is, why? What if we did focus somewhat, a little bit more inward here upon us? What if we took care of ourselves first? What are you going to do if it's let's say that you believe that everyone that doesn't have a home should be cared for. Well, if you truly believe that, open up your doors and bring in people who are homeless into your home, right? People generally practice something a little more reasonable. They take care of themselves first, and then those that are really good people, they then spread the wealth, right? The people that have billions of dollars, do you think they need that money? All of it? I mean, how much does it take? Is there a limit that should be? I would never dictate to anyone what they have to do with their money, even if they've worked for it, it's freaking theirs. You don't get to steal. That's on "Thou shalt not steal." Wasn't it one of the original things etched in the stone on the Ten Commandments? At least it was in the Cecil B. DeMille classic, wasn't it? When Moses went up to the mountain and came back with a gray beard. It's one of those things. You don't get to steal the stuff from the others. It's up to them. But maybe the moral ones do that and then spread it afterward. What if we as a country took that approach? Take care of ourselves first. I feel like the Trumpster is doing that, in a lot of respects, not artfully, sometimes, somewhat foolishly, and sometimes in ways that I completely disagree with, like I hope to get to today, the Venezuela crap, at the end. This is nonsense, seizing an oil tanker. That happened again yesterday, and I wish to get to that. But I've been promising for 3 days to get to Jaishankar and his commentary. So with that in mind, and because I do have a lot of content, I have 4 little sections, if you will, that I wish to get to today, and it might only be 3 because I've been babbling for a good beginning here. So we're going to get to Mr. Jaishankar, who acknowledges. I mean, sometimes there are moments in global affairs, like there's a shift when you realize that there's an adult in the room. You know, they don't come in with slogans. They haven't arrived with a moral lecture for everybody else or human rights yardsticks that they get apply only to their enemies like us and never to their friends, or certainly not to themselves. They certainly don't show up with hysterical, shaky tone of, in our history anyway, these Western globalists who sound like guidance counselors, for the rest of the world. Here you go. Here's your antidepressant. Follow us, right? We don't like that. No. Adults in the room, they walk in calmly and they speak reasonably and they say the same thing. They sit down quietly. And when they speak, people pay attention. Suddenly, people realize what diplomacy used to sound like before it was set on fire by Western globalists and replaced with hashtags about LGBTQ++, whatever, rights, sanctions against those who don't comply with things that we say, and the revolving door of special envoys who can't find half of the countries they lecture on the map, right? And in 2025, the adult in the room, one of them, a big one, is a guy named Subrahmanyam Jaishankar. And if you aren't listening to this guy, you probably should be. For me, Sergei Lavrov is one of the best and well-spoken and most relevant people of the 21st century so far. He's been the foreign minister of Russia for 25 years. Jaishankar, I don't know how long, but it's been quite a few years now. And Jaishankar is India's external affairs minister. He's a reserved, he's a precise, he's an unshakably composed person. And he's become the voice of the world. You don't want to listen to a Russian guy named Sergei Lavrov. Listen to a well-spoken English speaker named Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, right? And I hope I'm pronouncing that completely correctly. I believe I am. But he's part of a world and the voice of a world that is no longer willing to be managed, manipulated, intimidated, or guilt-tripped by the West, by the Western elites, by Washington, by Brussels. He says the same thing that Lavrov says, only in English, so he'd be a good person to listen to. Not the same thing, a little bit of different focus, because they are the largest country on the planet, 1.48 billion at last count, right? And growing quickly. The age of unipolarity is over, is what he says. But rather than accept this, the U.S., the Western elites, the European, appendages of that group continue behaving like they're the owner of a foreclosed property who doesn't want to admit that the bank has already changed the locks on the door of the world. India is doing what a civilization that is looking out for its people does. Maybe they're not doing it correctly. I don't know. I don't try to judge that. But I'm telling you, on the global stage, they are definitely rising. They're reorganizing, expanding their own influence, and choosing, more importantly, their own alliances. They don't apologize it. They don't ask for permission. And the globalist elites in the West, who have controlled India for at least the last 100 years, from England, from Washington, from London, and those people, the globalists of the world, cannot stand it. Okay, let's look at the difference between Indian diplomacy and Western diplomacy. The difference, I say, is mature thought process, mature belief structure. People that aren't trying to lecture, but trying to work together. When Jaishankar sits across from the Western interviewer, whether it's in Delhi, Washington, or Brussels, it's something great to see. The West still tries, everybody that interviews him, if it's a Western journalist, they still try to pull out the old Hillary Clinton script. Are you drifting away from us? Why won't India condemn Russia? How come you don't support our sanctions against other countries? Why do you still engage with Putin, that evil Putin? Why do you do it? Why? Why don't you take a harder line against China? It's a script of the world that doesn't exist anymore. That's part of the reason. A world where the U.S. believed it could scold other nations into compliance, where Europe believes its moral lectures actually meant something to the rest of us, and a world where alliances mean obedience to the West, to Washington, to these Hillary Clintons and Mitch McConnells of the world, right? Doesn't mean negotiation, doesn't mean working together for a common result, means obedience. But the era of Western elitist entitlement ended the moment Washington discovered that sanctions do not work on countries who have their own energy, can build their own markets, and their own population doesn't need validation from an American I don't know, late night comic or super Xer tweeter, somebody like that. And Jaishankar, who is a diplomat, reminds everyone of the obvious. He says things like, and he's consistent about this, just like Sergei Lavrov. He says, we have relationships with all major countries. No one can veto how we conduct those relationships. So translated into international relations English, he says, a little less brutally, we are not your client state. We're not somebody that is subordinate to you. And this shocks those in the West every time they hear it. They act like, oh, look at these guys, they're supporting Russia. He doesn't say we support Russia. He says we don't condemn Russia because you need us to. We do it if we wish to. But Russia is a partner of ours for a long time. It's, in the West, though, some of the elitists, at least, have forgotten that sovereignty exists in places that aren't named France, Germany, or California. That sovereignty exists in other places, in India, China, Russia. Other places are reminding us of that. And unless you want a constant war, like we've been wont to do over the last 50 years, you better start getting that through your head. I say the same about Venezuela, and we'll get to that after I'm done with Jaishankar and his discussion here. India's definition of diplomacy is pretty clear, and in my view, how it ought to be with us. If we thought more like this, on a federal level, on a national level, I would be much more comfortable than us telling the world what to do like we've been trying to do forever. Stable long-term partnerships are important. These long-term partnerships. Not ones change every 3 years, not BS. Non-ideological cooperation. Why do you have to have the same ideology? We force LGBTQ crap on people all over the world. Why? So they have to take our money. We control the script by our money, our assistance through the World Bank, through International Monetary Fund, through all that crap. Why? Why do we have to have the same ideological concerns and beliefs forced upon the rest of the world? Strategic autonomy. You don't have to agree with what Russia's doing in Ukraine, with what Russia has done in Ukraine, but they have their own strategic autonomy, and you have to either understand it or don't understand it. You don't get to force it. You don't get to. I don't believe you have the authority or ability to force it anyway, and that's been the trouble in the last at least 10 years. Think about national interests. We should think of our own too, not moral theater. I believe that's what India's definition, those four things. Western definition of diplomacy, at least the globalist elite part, is still the same. Maybe it's changing, but ours has deteriorated over years to emotional outrage disguised as policy. Oh, geez, they don't like women. They hate LGBTQ folks. Sanctions as a weapon and as a first resort. We'll sanction you. We'll tariff you. That's what we're doing now. Well, public shaming. Oh, geez, you're a Putin puppet. That's what you get. Instead of negotiation, instead of a rational discussion on your disagreements. Demands masquerading as alliances. Well, you need to support Ukraine, because you're our ally. You have to support Ukraine. Where's your blue and yellow flag? How come you don't have that? Treating the rest of the world like a bunch of subcontractors. That's what we've done. And Jaishankar, he calmly responds, he's a contrast to these frantic, slogan-driven foreign policy people in the collective globalist elite West that is controlled for so long. He doesn't raise his voice. He actually is raising standards. And people in the world, like me, like you if you're smart, are noticing that this is where the world is going. And we, as America, need to continue. We need to be our what would you call it? Example to the rest of the world ought to be like Sergei Lavrov, ought to be like Jaishankar, not Hillary Clinton. Rubio's a little better. He's stepped off, but he's still a globalist deep down, at least what I believe. Let's talk about India and Russia relationship. Anyway, this is something stable that the West has never understood in the first place. Western analysis keeps asking the same question. Why doesn't India condemn or break away from Russia? Why? And the answer is fairly simple. It's the same answer India has given for decades, since Soviet times. But the West has refused to process this information. But it's true. Russia has been India's most consistent great power partner since the 50s, even under the Soviet Union. They've been consistent, predictable, reliable, non-judgmental, non-intrusive, and not constantly trying to sell India a lecture disguised as a contract. India remembers who stood with it when the United States was busy arming Pakistan years ago and threatening sanctions every time New Delhi dared to act in its own self-interest. Yep, they remember that. India remembers that when the West described its nuclear tests, India's, as reckless, Russia responded by expanding cooperation and sending engineers, trying to help them build a nuclear power state. The Western world treats its alliances like a romantic relationship, emotional, conditional, hysterical sometimes. One disagreement and suddenly half the think tanks in Washington are screaming about betrayal. He cheated on me. He likes Russia. He's cheated on me. Russia treats their partnerships like infrastructure. They build it for endurance, for time, for long periods of time, not for short-term applause. That is why India trusts Moscow more than they trust Washington. That's all there is to it. And Jaishankar puts it quite plainly. India and Russia have one of the steadiest major power relationships in the world. Steadier, he said, than Russia's ties with China, Russia's ties with Europe, or the United States. It's not nostalgia he's talking about. It's not ideology. It's a structure of a geopolitical long-term alignment. What does Russia give India? Energy security. That's a big deal. Energy comes at a premium in India. It just does. They have so many people, so huge demand for energy. The U.S., who's going to supply it? Us? We aren't even steady. We can't keep the what do you call the pipeline? The pipeline that was going to run from Canada to Mexico. Billions spent, destroyed as soon as Joe Biden took office. Just stroke of a pen, billions evaporated, right? Russia gives India military hardware with no political strings. The S-400, they're buying a bunch of them. Air defense. They're buying their Su-57s. They're buying their airplanes. Technology transfer, they support each other. Support in multilateral forums, BRICS, Russia, India, China, RIC. Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They give them a dependable veto because the largest country on the planet doesn't have a veto structure in the UN, and Russia works with them to sometimes support that when America won't. A consistent counterbalance to China and the West. Russia has to manage their relationship with both China and India and does so very well. China manages its relationships with Russia and India, and all of them are quite strong and becoming stronger under Modi, under Xi Jinping, and under Putin. And I wonder what'll happen when those personalities change. I really do. The U.S., by contrast, what do? We threaten them with sanctions. We demand their alignment. You got to hate Russia. We twist their arms and disguise that as diplomacy. Do this, or we're going to sanction you too. Do this, or we're going to give you tariffs higher. We lecture them about human rights in their own country. You have to do this. Why? Because we say so. And most horrifying to a lot of people in the rest of the world, and I'm not advocating that we change our system, by the way. This is a reality, though, that they get a different foreign policy every 4 years from the U.S. There's no stability. We don't know. You don't build a 50-year, 100-year partnership around a country whose entire strategic posture resets every presidential election and every emotional breakdown between the president, the judicial branch, and Congress. India isn't choosing sides. It's choosing stability. That's what it's doing. And Jaishankar puts it out all the time. And people don't understand why they get this. I get it, and I hope I'm explaining it in a way that you understand it, because this is how the rest of the world leaders think. This is where they go. Rubio, he's thinking 3 years from now. What can I do to make my mark in the next 3 years so that I can be president 4 years from now? Then I can do what I want. How can I resist it right now? Hillary Clinton, same thing. When she was wandering the world collecting money for herself and her family, she was saying, wonder what I can do so that when I'm president, people understand. And they got to continue to kiss the ring of my power for more than just the 4 years that I'm Barack Obama's Secretary of State. Pretty soon, they're going to have to kiss my ring. They're going to have to genuflect in the Oval Office for me, not for Obama. And that is the way our politicians think. They're thinking about themselves. You can argue that Jaishankar, that Modi, that Xi Jinping and Putin are also thinking about themselves, but they have a different standard. They're not going anywhere. Agree with their politics or disagree with their politics, they're not going anywhere. And our globalist elites do not understand reality. You can disagree with it all you want. I'm not saying I agree with it completely. I'm saying it's a reality, and you have to deal with that reality. And the reality is our diplomats do not think that way. They don't think like Jaishankar. They want to go and lecture. So on the economic axis, why Russia-India is the West's nightmare, the Western nightmare is as follows, because at first glance, the recent Putin-Modi summit over the last weekend that Jaishankar was talking about looks like a standard diplomatic visit. But it's 2 days. It's handshakes, flags, formal dinners, usual ceremonial choreography that takes place. But you don't see Xi Jinping or Narendra Modi coming to Washington for a 2-day visit. That doesn't happen. The details of these visits tell a much larger story. Narendra Modi, and they don't do this hardly ever, greeted Vladimir Putin with a red carpet on the tarmac at the airport. That doesn't happen. That's extremely rare. And so the details are there. India and Russia are not merely, not just maintaining a relationship. They are expanding it into long-term strategic economic alignments. The outcomes. Here's what they actually did, and Jaishankar discussed in his deal. They have a worker mobility agreement. What did we do? We're charging $100,000 for Indian engineers to come to the U.S. $100,000 for their H-1B visa, right? Not so between Russia and India. They have those two and China, and they all fluctuate between the top three. 30, 40 years ago, the U.S. had the most engineers, absolutely hands down. Not like 150,000 in the entire United States on engineering. We've stayed static. We still have about 150,000. Go look at this. You can find the rates out there. Meanwhile, China, India, and Russia have tripled their number of engineers and the engineering schools. That's what they are focusing on. I heard, you know what? I apologize if it's not the day, but I was listening to JR yesterday or something like that. He was talking about trade schools and people coming into trade schools. And, you know, we're lacking in that area. Our education is crap, you know, these days, and we haven't focused on enough. Meanwhile, Russia, India, China have tripled or quadrupled in some cases the amount of engineering schools that they have. And now the outcome is a worker mobility agreement. It's a demographic of engineering and economic integration on the same continent, by the way, that is just happening. And what this means is Indian professionals and workers can move freely into Russian industries and back. Russia gets a boost to its labor force from all the Indian engineers who are no longer allowed in the United States because they don't have $100,000 to apply for an H-1B. India gains new employment channels in high-tech and industrial sectors, which are growing and booming. The West is losing again in influence and in shaping the global labor pattern. And that's just the truth. They came up with a new fertilizer joint venture. One of the largest exports from Russia is fertilizer. India is the world's second largest fertilizer importer, and Russia is one of the biggest producers. Okay, and their joint venture that they came up with Putin and Modi last week, India secures agricultural stability. Russia secures a massive guaranteed market because it was blocked coming out of the Black Sea ports. Can't come out of there. It's not going up in the north through the Baltics or up in the Arctic channels. They're focusing southeast, India, China, and quite successfully, by the way. The West's ability to pressure nations through food and fertilizer disruption is declining even further than it has been. Food security is national security, and India has locked it in with a generational deal with Russia. Generational, not 3 years, and by the way, you're out. There's been a massive Russian business delegation that arrived with Putin. He arrived not with a political entourage, but with hundreds of business leaders that came along with him. Why? Because Russia is moving its economic gravity eastward. They're hated incorrectly, in my opinion, in Europe and further west, but they're moving and gravitating eastward toward India, Asia, and India is welcoming this investment. They got technology, defense, energy, space, and nuclear cooperation. Those were discussions between Modi and Putin as well. The West cannot compete with those in these domains without trying to impose political conditions upon them. And Russia doesn't do that. They don't need to do that. By the way, I forgot to mention that on the same tarmac, this is important too. Why is it only Putin that gets these respects? He even got it from Trumpster in Alaska. They ride in the same car. He jumps in the same car. It's not you get in your caravan of black SUVs and I'll get in mine. He got in the presidential limo with President, with Modi. He did that. He did the same thing with Trumpster when they got up there. And this is why U.S. diplomats keep making the same confused statement, taking the same confused approach. We're disappointed that India won't join in Western sanctions against Russia. Of course India won't. Why? Because sanctions regime is not strategy. It's another emotional tantrum of the girlfriend who no longer cares for you. It's another, or wants to tell you what to do, wants to dictate to you. India is playing a long game. So's Russia, by the way. The West, by nature, we have to play, at least in America, we have to play the short game. Russia is playing a patience game, and China is playing the infrastructure game, also long term. And which one do you think is going to win? India's message to the West is, we're not your latest project. We just aren't. But the clearest moment in Jaishankar's remarks, at least for me, came when he responded to a question about India and whether it feels pressured by Washington. He didn't hesitate, stutter, wobble, nothing. No backpedaling. Here's what he said. We have freedom of choice. We do not accept any country having a say in how we develop our relationships. Now, how powerful is that? You don't get to tell us what to do. This is the geopolitical equivalent of telling somebody, you don't own me, and you never did. You just thought you did, you know? For decades, the West misunderstands and misunderstood India, thought it as some kind of a swing state, something that had to be lured, pushed, ideologically aligned. The misunderstanding came from Western elitists' deep misconceptions, the belief that sovereignty is somehow negotiable because you control the purse strings. When you start not controlling the purse strings, you can no longer control the ideology, nor the sovereignty. And India doesn't negotiate its sovereignty. Modi has said it. Jaishankar says it. It doesn't dilute it. It doesn't trade for applause and go, geez, we support, the pink flags or multicolored rainbow flags. The U.S., by the way, in foreign policy anyway, Rubio's had to come to grips with this because the U.S. still assumes that nations want to be subordinates to Washington, not partners, because they never were, in exchange for some sort of validation by the globalist elitists in the West. Europe assumes that every country still wants to emulate, the religion of regulation, by the same people who've controlled that sort of regulation and involvement forever. India doesn't want either one of those things. India wants respect, wants to be treated like an adult, like they have, like their voice really does matter, and it doesn't, you wouldn't have to dictate to you what your voice is, right? What's India's approach with China? What does grown-up border management look like? And there has been some trouble between India and China on this border. Remember me telling you from the BRICS conference when I went to Russia last year to Kazan, telling you about that on the sidelines of that, China and India came to an agreement on the disputed lands. They said, well, we'll agree to disagree, but we will no longer consider it a war zone. We'll resolve that part. And they did. So while Western analysts obsess over every headline that contains the word China, India is doing something different. India behaves rationally. Jaishankar outlined this situation in his interview. He said that these tensions have been eased, agreements have been made, patrol patterns have resumed in many areas, even though the disagreement is still there. Most importantly, communication channels are still functioning, and stability, non-escalation is the priority. So this is on both sides, by the way. It isn't softness, it isn't weakness, it's strategy. And India understands something that Europe never understood. Diplomacy isn't therapy or telling somebody what they got to do. It's not where you're going to express your feelings and have some therapist tell you, what you have to do. A therapist should give you options, ways to deal with your problems. Diplomacy is something where you go to prevent disaster. Escalation. India does not need a war with China. China does not need war with India. And both of them understand that. They both understand the cost and what happens if you do. The West, on the other hand, imagines conflict as some sort of self-expression, right? And why can't the West adapt to India's new role? Why? Because India exposes Western contradiction. Contradiction one, we believe in democracy and in sovereignty unless you vote the wrong way. India votes independently and the West hates that. Here's contradiction number two. We global elitists, we want global partnerships, but only if we lead in the partnership. India refuses to be subordinate and the West isn't prepared for that. Contradiction number three. We want a multipolar world, but only if we remain the center of it. That's the U.S. approach. India treats the U.S. as one pole among many, and the West is offended by that. The Hillary Clintons of the world, the globalist elites, are offended. Europe elites offended. Contradiction number four. We support sovereignty unless it interferes with our agenda. But India says our sovereignty is non-negotiable, and so the West calls India uncooperative. Contradiction. Contradiction number five. We value stability unless instability, Ukraine, benefits us somehow. India values genuine stability. They value long-term relationships. The West values disorder that they control or somehow manage. I say that they can't. But India breaks Western paradigms not because it is anti-Western, but because it's other than Western. They're independent. That's why. India is not the West's alternative. India is kind of a correction of this, right? The West has tried to export ideology, not a system. India is exporting their own stability. The West is offering political volatility. You know, you got to join us, but we change every 3 years. India's offering and grabbing continuity. The West is offering moral absolutism. Follow us or you're immoral. India offers realistic, realism. Reality. We're reality. You don't have to agree with it, but reality is reality. You know, we don't control it. Neither do you, by the way. It's basically what Jaishankar is saying. I don't know. It's not anti-Western. It's post-colonial. It remembers being colonized. And in the Western world, which built its influence on control of such states, fear and dependency, they're now the Western elites are confronting a world in which none of these tools work any longer. In a multipolar century, according to Jaishankar, India's place is pretty secure. We, the world, is living through the end of a Western strategic monopoly. Western strategic monopoly does not exist any longer, and people need to come to grips with that. But our globalist elites are dying trying to reinstate globalism as the way the world is won. The world has multiple decision-making centers and growing. Not every nation wants to be China, wants to be Russia, wants to be Washington. No nations want to be Europe, and they certainly don't want to be a client state of Washington. And Jaishankar tells us that India's foreign policy is showing what comes next. I'm spending so much time on this because it's important. India believes in multiple partnerships, no permanent enemies, no permanent alliances, no issue-based cooperation, respect for its own sovereignty. You respect our sovereignty, we'll respect yours. And strategic self-definition. Our strategy means that we have to work with China, who's right next door, and with Russia, who's the largest supplier of natural resources on the planet. This is not the model of a developing country that has to make austerity controls for the IMF or the World Bank. It's the model of a new global power. India isn't rising. India has risen. And if we're not careful, we're going to have trouble catching up with them. We need to start working together, not creating further enemies. So when Jaishankar speaks, I say the 21st century is answering. The most important thing about Jaishankar isn't his rhetorical skill, although he has it. It's not his knowledge of history or his diplomatic professionalism, although all three are quite exceptional. In my view, he's number 2 to Sergei Lavrov, who is, hands down the best on the planet. And what matters is this: he speaks for a world in English tired of Western improvisation, the comedy club masquerading as some sort of leadership. He speaks for nations that build their own future. He speaks for civilizations like Africa, like the Middle East, who have survived colonization, exploitation, and ideological coercion from the West. He speaks for the people who want respect, not some kind of oversight. And he speaks for the future, not the past. In a room full of Western diplomats still living in 1998, Subrahmanyam Jaishankar walks in calmly, sits down, speaks from 2075. The walk softly and carry a big stick? I say it applies to him. And the contrast between approach and diplomacy is devastating for globalist elites, because the truth is simple. India is the adult in the room. Jaishankar is the adult in the room. The people of the West and the globalist elites are not. And the world prefers to listen to adults. That is absolutely true, and I think it's important. Another thing that's coming up, a big shocker. This is coming up, and I hope I can get through this pretty quickly because I still want to get to all 3 segments. And this segment is about Steven Seagal. Now, Steven Seagal, I tell you what, there are moments in history when the great empires of the world are brought low, not by armies, revolutions, or economic collapse, but by something simple and humiliating: reality. Sometimes reality arrives in the forms of a 6'4" Aikido master with a ponytail, a Russian passport, and zero patience for Western hypocrisy. Enter, and I'm no huge fan, but this is true, every word of it, Steven Seagal, the actor, producer, martial artist, unlikely geopolitical truth teller, is finishing his special military operation documentary. It's called Va imya Spravedlivosти, in the name of justice. And the reaction from Western media isn't just irritation, it's panic. It's real panic, because everybody's going to watch this. Seagal isn't just making a film, he's detonating the Western narrative, and the West knows it. Now, way back when, who's the Oliver Stone, I think it was, who created that Ukraine on Fire, I think it's called, and you can buy it on you should watch this. And I bought it 3-4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, before the war started. But it tells you everything about Ukraine, and you go through it. People hated him, they badmouthed him, they went through it, and everything. 90% of what he said in there is absolutely true, and it was true then too, but nobody paid attention to it, and they downplayed it, they canceled it, and they're trying to do the same thing before Seagal's SVO, Special Military Operation documentary comes out. Why does Seagal terrify the West more than Russian tanks do? Well, let's start with the basics on here. The Western media can easily dismiss Russian reporters, Russian soldiers, Russian diplomats, Russian filmmakers, Russian politicians, and anybody else as a Kremlin propagandist, a puppet of Putin, right? They just hit, control copy, control V on their computer, and Russian mouthpiece, disinformation, blah, blah, blah. And it's a script they've been using for a long time, especially since 2014. And it shows, that's all we've done. That's it. All you can do is cancel culture people that say anything positive about Russia, about Vladimir Putin. Steven Seagal breaks that template. Why? Because he's an American. Number one, he isn't an obscure American, but he's one that has celebrity status. You can censor RT. You can sue, what's her name? Margarita Simonyan. You can mark her with Western sanctions. You can put her on the Mirotvorets list in Ukraine. You can censor. You can ban Russian film. You can ban 1.8 million followers from being able to watch Panchenko on Ukrainian news and delete her from YouTube. That's BS. And you can silence other Russian and Ukrainian journalists who disagree with the narrative, but you can't cancel an American actor for telling the truth about Ukraine without reminding people that free speech is supposed to be our thing. Free speech is supposed to be us. He's a cultural icon, and Hollywood cannot, never has been able to control him. This is a guy who built his film career disobeying studio systems, did his own fights, refused to follow the celebrity playbook. Good luck telling Seagal he's not allowed to film in Donbass. He'll film there twice just because you told him not to. He has nothing to lose, and that makes him globally dangerous. And you can support him or dissupport him. I'm not saying I even like Steven Seagal. I thought his movies were a little bit cheesy, from that point of view, and standard, typical. And I never really cared for them. I was much more of I don't know. I suppose. I can't remember. Arnold Schwarzenegger, dude. The Terminators were far better than the guy on a ship, doing military stuff. In my opinion, I think he was a number 3 at least. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo. What the hell's his name? Can't remember. And then came Steven Seagal. That's the way I look at it anyway. You can't threaten him with career ruin. He's already moved on. He doesn't do it. Hey, Hollywood already tried that. He survived it. He moved to Russia. He's got a new audience. He built a new life. He's a man with nothing to lose, and you can't control him. A man who can't be controlled cannot be silenced. He's a bridge between cultures the West wants to keep separate. He speaks English. More importantly, he speaks American. And he understands Russian and the Russian spot. He's fluent in martial arts world. He's in entertainment world and in geopolitics. He's a cross-cultural figure that's like, the latest nightmare for Western disinformation, managers who rely on rigid categories to maintain psychological control of the public. He's been there. This is one of the biggest things that he's going to be doing. This is probably more important than all of his other movies. He's been physically present on the front lines in Donbass, in Mariupol, talking to soldiers, commanders, civilians. I wish I was part of this, truthfully. The people Western journalists claim to cover but never actually meet. That's what makes him particularly mentally lethal in this respect. He isn't speculating. He is witnessing what's going on. And Western media can't defend against witnesses that actually saw it. Hollywood versus Seagal. Hollywood has spent years manufacturing wartime narratives. Zelensky is the new Churchill. Kiev is a beacon of freedom. Ukrainian army is undefeatable. Russia is inches from collapse. Remember all these narratives? Every film studio, every media platform, every streaming platform, every late night comic, every awards show collapsed into this script. A script straight out of the Biden era State Department, even before the Putin era. State Department. Obama era State Department. Western media produces more propaganda fiction about Ukraine than all the Marvel movies combined. And, frankly, most of the Marvel movies were more believable. The problem is simple. None of it was true. And Seagal knows how movie illusions work. He had a 40-year career in action choreography that looked real but wasn't. So when he sees fake narratives masquerading as war reporting, he recognizes it the way magicians recognize other magicians' tricks. Hollywood can't afford a guy like Seagal telling how this really went. and how the sausage is made. So the documentary, Why in the Name of Justice, is a direct threat to PSYOPs in the West. Seagal announced that the film would be ready for global release within 6 to 8 weeks. I'm watching for it. The West has responded like a toddler whose iPad battery has died. Why? They're talking about, oh my God, this is dangerous. We can't have this. He's nobody. That's what we're getting. What makes this documentary dangerous? It shows the Russian perspective. That's what. It destroys the myth that Russia is somehow isolated. It undermines the Western portrayal of the special military operation as an unprovoked act. It documents the 2014 coup, 8 years of Ukrainian shelling in Donbass, the Minsk agreements betrayals, two of them, NATO expansion, that's been threatening, U.S. military involvement in Ukraine, chemical weapons development in Ukraine. Seagal plans to show viewers that the conflict didn't begin in 2022. Same thing. It began in Washington boardrooms years earlier. This is going to humanize Russian soldiers, something the West has forbidden. They are killers. They are orcs, remember? If the audience sees real faces, real stories, real motivation, psychological demonization is going to go away. Western propaganda relies on these abstract villains, of the orcs. It makes the audience, what Seagal plans to do. Makes the audience ask questions that the West fears the most. Things that I've been saying now for a year and a half. What else have we been lied to about? That's a huge question, and this doesn't help. Once that question is asked, all Western disinformation systems collapse like a badly built movie set, right? And it's creating panic. It really is. Western journalists know they can't refute facts from somebody who is physically present. You can argue about statistics. You can argue even satellite images. You can't argue with a man standing in a bomb crater interviewing the family who lived next to it. They're worried about this. They know that Seagal's audience is not an ordinary audience, and he's going to get a lot of people watching. It's going to be American veterans, martial artists, people that think independently, people that are deeply distrustful of their own government already, and people who reject mainstream media narrative. This is the last demographic, that Western elitists want exposed to a coherent counter-narrative. The West's own storytellers have failed for years. Zelensky cannot and did not play Churchill. Even if you believed it short term, the audience is tired of it and sees beyond, don't look at the man behind the curtain, right? NATO cannot play savior anymore because the audience sees all the corruption. Mainstream media cannot play truth teller because the audience understands the manipulation. And Seagal, this is ironic because he's going to restore somewhat what Western journalists have destroyed, at least about Ukraine: credibility. And that is unforgivable. And why he's because he's going to be more successful, more effective than anybody else. He speaks to ordinary people, not policy elites. He talks in moral language the West cannot dismiss. He doesn't speak from an ideological platform. He's bringing authenticity to it. And the documentary is going to be information warfare without warfare. This documentary is going to expose further Western globalist elite failure. And people are going to watch. I wonder how many millions he'll get. What's the symbolism of one man, one camera, and one collapsing empire? It's almost poetic, right? An American, not a general, not a senator, not a diplomat, a man known for breaking arms in movies is going to break the backbone of Western media credibility. And he didn't need a Pentagon budget. He didn't need a NATO spokesperson, and he didn't need the New York Times to do it. All he needs is a camera, honesty, and the courage to go where Western journalists will not. Tell you what, this is going to be a hell of a deal, and it's not choreographed by the people that normally choreograph it, right? I wanted to get into the Zelensky what's going to happen with Zelensky, but I have one further topic I want to get to before that. And this one is about this tanker that Trump announced yesterday that was seized. And I tell you what, I hope I have enough time to get there and to the end of this little essay portion. Empires like ours, they don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they are sloppy. They stop respecting their own rules, the rules they claim to uphold. They confuse improvisation for strategy. They mistake coercion for persuasion. They mistake fear for respect. And most of all, they mistake their own propaganda for the truth. And the U.S.'s seizure of this Venezuelan oil tanker, according to the old Trumpster, the largest ever seized, this isn't just a maritime incident, in my opinion. I think it's another turning point and a moment when the facade of the so-called rules-based international order cracked further. Now it's loud enough for the whole world to hear, right? Washington grabbed a tanker it has no legal right to touch. Then Trump brags about it. The standard news people, spin the fallout one way or the other, for or against. And then you watch while the international community quietly added this incident to the growing list of our own American-owned diplomatic self-inflicted wounds. I am very much against what we have done. Why? I'll tell you why. Because this is not a foreign policy victory. This is a strategic embarrassment. And the world, same world that I talk about all the time, especially Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, and the entire non-aligned block of countries in the world are certainly watching. When the world's self-declared guardian of maritime freedom behaves like a pirate, the narrative is shifting, and I'm telling you, this narrative is shifted. How did the seizure happen? This is you want to talk about legal or administrative governmental overreach. Let's talk about it. Trump confirmed the operation himself. We just seized a tanker, very large, he said, the largest ever seized. There it is, a confession. No ambiguity, no diplomatic buffer, no plausible deniability. Just a public televised announcement that instantly raised a question, at least for me. Under whose authority? Under what authority? Because maritime law shouldn't be a guessing game. If the tanker was in U.S. territorial waters, it wasn't, then the U.S. has jurisdiction. But no one, not a single official, has claimed this. If the tanker was in Venezuelan waters, then the U.S. committed an act of aggression against Venezuela. And, the U.S. isn't doing itself any favors with the Global South. In the Global South, they view it as piracy. If the tanker was in international waters, then the U.S. violated UNCLOS norms because sanctions are not international law. They are a domestic political tool that end at the waterline unless somehow multilateralized. And if the tanker was flagged under another nation, the U.S. has violated that nation's sovereignty. And this has enormous consequences diplomatically and certainly downstream. The fact that Washington has refused to release, at least initially, as of about 6 hours ago, the name of the tanker, the flag it sailed under, the coordinates that it was seized upon, or the specific legal grounds for seizing it tells you everything. This is not law enforcement. It's not anti-piracy. It is not counterterrorism. This is an extraterritorial sanction enforcement. This is dangerous, dubious legally, this category of U.S. foreign operation, it is existing in a gray zone between law and force, between democracy, diplomacy, and coercion. It is despised by nearly every developing nation on earth. Why is the seizure illegal? Or why, let's be precise about this. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, right, UNCLOS, which the U.S. refuses to ratify while demanding that others obey it, under that, commercial vessels in international waters cannot be seized for violating unilateral sanctions, cannot be boarded without host nation consent, cannot be detained without demonstrated criminal activity, cannot be treated as military contraband unless they are tied to an armed conflict recognized by the UN Security Council. None of that has happened. And the U.S. justified previous seizures by claiming oil shipments were funding terrorism. Vessels are linked to sanctioned Iranian military networks. There are multilateral agreements in place, but none of these apply to Venezuela. They just don't. Venezuela is not a terrorist state, not even under U.S. law. Venezuela is not at war with the United States. The U.S. simply wants regime change. That's it. Venezuela's oil exports are legal under international law. They're only illegal, arguably, under U.S. unilateral sanctions. And Trump is bragging about, this. This removes any doubt. This is not a legal enforcement action. This is a strategic theater. This is, the late night comedy. The law is not ambiguous. The U.S. does not have universal jurisdiction over global commerce on the sea. The moment Washington acts like it does, it becomes the very thing it claims it opposes. A rogue maritime actor. The rest of the world sees this. I see this. Why did the U.S. do it anyway? Why? I say this is desperation masquerading as strength. The seizure isn't about Venezuela. Not really. Washington is afraid of something else. They're afraid of the collapse of the U.S. influence in Latin America because Brazil is already BRICS. Argentina is shifting. Mexico is more and more defiant. Colombia is questioning U.S. dominance. Chile is drifting. Bolivia is untouchable. And Venezuela is surviving sanctions. The Monroe Doctrine is dead. Washington just forgot to, have a funeral, for it. And instead, we're coming up with a new Trump doctrine. And the rise of multipolar oil channels is a big stake in the heart of this U.S. dominance, right, in the South. Russia and Iran sell oil globally despite sanctions. China is paying in yuan. India is paying in rupees and dirhams. BRICS Plus is creating a non-Western energy clearing system, non-Western insurance system. This tanker seizure is a symbolic attempt to show the world that Washington still polices maritime commerce, and it is backfiring. Trump wants a show of force. Trump's political instinct is the theatrical dominance, let's call it. He sees foreign policy as a negotiating room where forceful gesture is projecting strength for the deal. I'm holding all the cards. But diplomacy isn't real estate. It's not a business deal. Seizing tankers is not the same as a hostile takeover of a hotel. The global South is interpreting this action not as strength, but as insecurity. And the U.S. intelligence phenomena in Washington, they want more leverage. Washington dreams of splitting Venezuelan elites and of getting rid of Maduro. That's all over the news here on the TVs here right now. They had the yesterday, I forget her name, the lady who got the Nobel Prize instead of Trump. They're trying to get rid of Maduro and install her instead. So here's the problem. Venezuela's entire oil sector is already operating outside of the Western systems. So the seizure accomplishes nothing other than revealing the U.S. circus and stealing a tanker full of fuel. I also saw something that said we're going to keep the oil, by the way. What's the Nobel Prize intervention, this diplomatic weapon disguised as an award, right? One day after the tanker seizure, the Nobel Committee, in its they had already announced who was going to win, but the ceremony was a day later. It was yesterday. They issued a direct political ultimatum to Nicolas Maduro. They gave the prize to the opposition leader Maria Corina Machado's daughter, and then demanded that Maduro accept election results and step down. This is, some say, unprecedented. I don't say so. I think we've used the Nobel Peace Prize as a forum for this kind of regime change crap forever. The Nobel Committee is not the UN. It's not an election tribunal. It isn't a sovereign government. It's not an international court. It's a group of Norwegian academics with loyalties to NATO and to globalist Western political, conditioning. They are attempting regime change through ceremony. Let's be clear that this is interference. It's a colonialism. It's theatrical colonialism. This is the West weaponizing soft power against a sovereign state. This is political warfare dressed up as humanitarian recognition. And everybody else saw it instantly. They know it for what it is because they've seen it before. We've seen it before in Myanmar, in Belarus, in Serbia, Nicaragua, Sudan, Zimbabwe. A dissident gets awarded a prize. In the, dissident, somebody gets awarded a prize. The leader is delegitimized. The West declares the whole government illegitimate, and pressure is applied for transition. This is the script. It's not democracy. This is psychological warfare. And you pair it with the seizure of a tanker, and the message becomes unmistakable. The European allies, the U.S., the globalist elites want Maduro gone, and they are escalating from sanctions to seizure to symbolic assassination. They're talking about the CIA going in there. The world has changed, though. This isn't 1983 Grenada. It's not 1989 Panama. It's not 2003 Iraq. The rest of the world is watching. They might not do anything, but they're certainly watching. Russia is present. China is present. India is present. BRICS is present. African countries, South African countries are all present and watching. And global energy markets are not controlled by Washington anymore. And this Nobel stunt, reveals, in my opinion, desperation. How did Maduro react? Is it correct or not? Why does the global South mostly agree with him? Maduro said the tanker seizure is illegal. It's an aggression against Venezuela. It's imperialist. And it's a violation of sovereignty. All of these are absolutely correct. You can dislike Maduro all you want, but he's right. Countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, many of whom have been bullied by unilateral U.S. sanctions for decades, see this event not as a Venezuela issue, but as a warning to them as well. And I think that's what it was intended to be. If they can seize Venezuelan oil, they can take our assets as well. This is why U.S. unilateral sanctions are hated worldwide and are spurring the running away to other, more stable structures. These aren't laws, by the way. These are global threats. The tanker incident confirms the fear that Washington can and will seize your foreign property, punish a non-Western economy, and weaponize maritime dominance. Because who wants to fight the Sixth Fleet? Who wants to fight any U.S. fleet? This pushes nations directly into the arms of China's Belt and Road initiatives, BRICS banking alternatives, non-Western shipping insurers, this is a growing market, Russian energy exchanges, and alternative payment systems. So in trying to demonstrate global control, Washington is accelerating globalist or global defect. They're going to other places China and Russian response, what were they? Strategic patience. Beijing and Moscow gave subtle, deliberate responses. They didn't escalate. They didn't retaliate. They don't need to. They know that this seizure hurts Washington more than it hurts Venezuela. And here's why. The U.S. exposed its own willingness to violate maritime norms. This is diplomatic gold for Moscow and Beijing. Every time Washington gets to speak about rules, Russia and China will point to the tanker. You know, you don't obey the rules. Here we go again. Same old crap. Rule for me, but not for you. It's typical. The seizure will push Venezuela further into trusting Russia and China more than the U.S. in its own hemisphere. This is a big mistake. The U.S. effectively handed Moscow and Beijing exclusive influence in Caracas. We used to have a chance. The only thing we can do now is regime change. You know, that's it. CIA offs Maduro, and we install this Nobel Peace Prize lady and then claim we did the world a favor. That's the next step, by the way. And when the West criticizes Russian actions in Ukraine or South China Sea, Russia and China can go, yeah, but you steal tankers in international waters, so, don't moralize to me, buddy. It helps Russian narrative on U.S. hypocrisy. Moscow has long said that the U.S. makes rules it doesn't follow. The U.S. uses the law and money as a weapon, not a standard, and Western institutions are tools of power, not of justice. Western elitists, power. Western globalists, power. That's what we're fighting about. And this incident validates every single Russian argument. It accelerates BRICS plus maritime alternatives. You can expect now new shipping registries, further insurance system growth outside of Western Lloyd's of London, new arbitration mechanisms for disputes built on BRICS plus, built on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Lots of shipping coming out of those places. They're just build their own. They're creating alternative structures already. Watch about joint naval protection corridors, especially in the Arctic. Figure that out. That's going to be one of the busiest sectors on the globe, controlled by Russia, China, and now India. The world is preparing for a future already where Western maritime dominance is no longer assumed, and the U.S. just gave them another reason to do so. What is the consensus by the global South? The U.S. is further and further acting as a rogue. You know, I want to be pretty blunt about this. The world isn't viewing this tanker Seizure as a demonstration of American strength. They're saying it is illegal, reckless, unstable, imperial, unpredictable, and dangerous. The phrase circulating in diplomatic circles is this: Washington is no longer a reliable steward of the sea. And once that belief takes further root, the consequences will multiply. More countries will avoid, not go to, U.S. shipping lanes. They don't want to risk their stuff to be seized. More oil will be traded in non-Western currency to avoid sanctions. More maritime security pacts will form outside of NATO, especially among BRICS plus countries. Legitimacy of U.S. naval supremacy will erode. We're still the most powerful, but supremacy without legitimacy equals tyranny. The next generation of global leadership is going to realign. The children of today's foreign ministers are going to grow up saying we must not allow ourselves to be dependent on a system that the U.S. controls because you can't trust them. This is how empires die, not by force, but by a loss of trust. And what's Trump's role in all this? It's kind of the brag, because he's a braggadocio guy that blew up the operation. One of the most damaging aspects of this incident is how he communicated it. Now, I've been saying this forever. In his first term, if Trump hadn't have been so, I don't know what, so mean, so beating up on people all the time. That's really about the only. I wish he was a little more political, just a little bit more. I like his blunt way of speaking, but I don't like the constant attack and calling people stupid. And, I don't like that. It's like the insult comic thing. I never really got into that. So Trump didn't issue a legal justification. He didn't reference a law. He didn't point to any criminal activity. He didn't cite a multilateral group of people who approve. He didn't frame it in any sort of diplomatic language. It's his latest trophy. Largest tanker ever seized. That's what he said. This transforms the incident from a law enforcement action into new political theater and, in my view, an international embarrassment. Diplomats dread these things when their own leader undermined the legal framing with one boastful sentence. The world interprets it. I interpret it as we did it because we can. Because we're the biggest dog on the block. We are the global bully. And when the global community hears that from a superpower, they start preparing for a world in which that superpower itself is not followed, becomes isolated. Because no nation, not even an ally, trusts a power that acts outside of its own rules. I think this seizure has backfired, and history is going to remember it. You can agree with me or disagree with me. That is the beauty of our system, and it's the beauty of words. And I'd be happy to listen to another point of view that says, oh, gee, the sanctions mean something. Nope. Allegedly, the law means something. Doesn't in Missouri. I've lectured on that a million times, and I'll continue to do so. There is no law. Licensing. Licensing. We'll get to that another day. I am going to come back to that, and there's plenty of things that government overreach are against, but this U.S. tanker seizure will be remembered not as a bold display of strength, but as a warning sign of imperialist overreach. It demonstrates, in my opinion, legal recklessness, diplomatic incompetence, strategic miscalculation, political immaturity, moral inconsistency, and the collapse of any sort of narrative positive to the U.S. This is how the world reads the event, okay? This is how the world reads it. The United States no longer follows the rules it demands that others obey. It just doesn't happen. And once that perception becomes a global truth, the authority of the U.S. further collapses faster than its enemies could ever hope to achieve it through war. The tanker seizure didn't weaken Venezuela. It weakened Washington. Ultimately, Maduro might be offed. He might be killed off. I think that's truly the next step. I think, the Nobel Prize stunt shouldn't be taken as any sort of thought process that this is correct. It's delegitimized the Nobel Committee. I haven't been paying attention to them forever. Trump's bragging doesn't show dominance. It's showing desperation. Do what I say. The world is in a new era. One where maritime law must be protected from politics, global trade has to be protected from unilateral interference, and sovereignty has to be protected from Western dominance and opportunism. That's what I say. And this incident is going to fuel that transformation. The empire touched a tanker it had no right to touch, and the world is going to realize that when the emperor has no robes left, when he's naked, all he has is rhetoric to share. And I think that is the sad truth of that story. So I think it's important, all three of these things, Jaishankar, Steven Seagal, and the seizure of a tanker, moral decline of the empire is upon us. And which means it's going to speed up the global decline of the empire. I think we need to focus upon us a little more anyway. I don't see this as all negative. Don't take anything I've said as negative. I think this is going to force us to build something better at home. I think Americans want something better at home. I think that's where ultimately we're going, but I believe the old Trumpster on the international stage is making a few mistakes that are furthering that alongside. Maybe he's doing it on purpose. I don't know. I'd like to think that he knows what he's doing when it comes to seizing these tankers, but it's more like a justification that I hear. It's because I'm bigger than you. You're going to do what I told you to do, or you're getting a spanking. And the spanking is, we're taking your ship. Well, we're keeping that oil. Did you hear that? We're going to keep that oil off of that tanker. We just got us free tanker oil. Why? Because we're a bigger bully. That's us. Anyway, I appreciate you listening today. Listen every day, Monday through Friday, from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. On damradio.com/live. All of my shows are recorded and put out at the damradio/podcasts, and also at internationalflavor.com. You can listen to all my shows. This one will be up in about a half an hour, I guess. It'll be up and ready for your listening pleasure once more, or sharing with your friends. I appreciate you being here and hope that you continue to listen to Damn Radio. Love it when you do, and I hope you have a good Thursday, and listen to JR when he comes up at 2 o'clock. Have a nice day.